Fantastic. Well, friends, I think we will get started if that's okay. I don't know about you, but Zoom still gives me a slight shudder of unwelcome nostalgia going back to the COVID times. But thanks very much for joining today's webinar. My name is David Hope-Jones. I'm the Chief Executive of the South of Scotland Destination Alliance. Our consumer-facing brand is Scotland Starts Here. Thanks for signing up for today's digital meeting. We have an hour. We'll finish promptly at 2:30, I do promise. And we're really looking at that question of the Galloway National Park. Again, in case anyone doesn't know, and I'm sure you all do, NatureScot is currently running a consultation until Valentine's Day, 14th of February, looking for opinions on whether local individuals and communities and businesses are for or against the idea of national park, and crucially, what type of national park they might be interested in if they are interested. The SSDA, as a network representing the visitor economy across Dumfries and Galloway, and the Scottish Borders, put a survey out just before the formal consultation started, asking the opinion of tourism businesses on that question of the Galloway National Park, and we've shared on our website the results of that business through some of our locally led destination development meetings. That's basically just a fancy way of saying local meetings discussing tourism. One of the questions that we had from tourism businesses across particularly D&G was, well, what's been the experience so far in the two existing national parks in Scotland? And so at that point, we, through Visit Scotland, and my thanks to Visit Scotland for facilitating it, reached out to the Cairngorms National Park. And today's webinar is really, I suppose, a bit of listening to two people. Grant, the Chief Executive of the Cairngorms National Park Authority, and Craig, who's the Chief Executive of the Cairngorms Business Partnership, which runs the consumer-facing brand Visit Cairngorms. Today's digital meeting is one of dozens and dozens of meetings run by different organisations and networks looking at the question of the Galloway National Park. But it is very focused, our discussion today. It's focused specifically on listening to what has been the experience of the Cairngorms National Park. I'll talk you through the agenda in a second. But I suppose what I want to say from the outset, and no great surprise, I suspect here, is there is, across the region, a range of views about the Galloway National Park. Many of those are very strongly and sincerely felt. And, I'm keen to start by saying I totally recognise those different views and I respect those different views. And whatever your view on the Galloway National Park, whether you're madly in favour of it or madly against it, please do complete the NatureScot consultation before the 14th of February. That is how you can have your view heard. Today is not attempting to try and give voice to everyone and to share all the different views on this really important issue, but it is at the request of business specifically looking to listen to the experience of the Cairngorms National Park. So my thanks in anticipation for your respect for this, the focus of today's meeting, and for listening respectfully to our two main speakers today. And I suppose that the final point I might make, if I may, is to recognise that if there is a Galloway National Park, absolutely no one is proposing that it is a replication of either what's happening in Cairngorms or in Loch Lomond, or indeed anywhere else. It's not a replica of the Lake District or Northumberland or the New Forest, but rather the people of Galloway are being asked, do you want a national park? And if so, what flavour of national park would work for Galloway? So there's much, if there was a national park in Galloway, that would be different to the Cairngorms. But I think it's really useful to take a moment, sit back, have a cup of tea, and have an informal conversation with Grant and Craig to understand what has been their experience from their perspective. The way we're going to do it is, in a moment, I'm going to pass over to, I think, Grant first, and give Grant sort of 10 minutes to give us a general overview from his perspective. We've intentionally asked no formal presentations. This is an informal conversation, and Grant will speak for about 10 minutes about his experience of the Cairngorms National Park Authority. We'll then hand over to Craig, and he'll speak for about 10 minutes from the business partnership perspective. And then we're going to move to the more, I suppose, interactive bit. And what we're going to do is, I've gone back to the results of that survey that I mentioned of businesses from kind of late autumn last year. And I've pulled out what are the 7 top concerns that businesses have said that they have about a national park. And we're just going to do a quick run through in 10 minutes of those 7 concerns and a quick response from Grant and Craig. But also we're then going to spend 10 minutes on what are some of the opportunities of the national park that have been experienced in the Cairngorms. And the last 10 minutes, and I promise, is going to be an open Q&A. So please do put questions in the chat box. Again, keep them respectful and keep them answerable. A reminder, a question ends with a question mark. But do put your questions in the chat box. And I do promise the last 10 minutes of the meeting is going to be questions there. But I suspect many of the hot topics and the questions are going to be discussed already by that point. If that sounds all right, let's not waste any more time listening to me dribble on. I'm very keen to pass over to Grant, the Chief Executive of the Cairngorms National Park. Grant, 10 minutes. We would love to hear your experience that the Cairngorms has had over the last 20 years or so with the National Park. Over to you, Grant.
That's great, and thanks so much, David, and nice to meet you all. Great to see you all, and great to see so many people here today. So I'm going to just talk about a bit about the National Park and Park Authority in general, then focus a bit on the tourism aspects associated with the park and the visitor management side of things, which people are interested in today. And then, as David said, happy to take questions at the end about anything. So, Park's been in existence for roughly 20 years. I've been Chief Executive of the Cairngorms National Park for the past 12 years. As you know, we have a board within the Cairngorms National Park, and that board is 19 people. Of those 19 people, 5 are directly elected by the people in the park, 7 are local councillors from the 5 local authorities that the Cairngorms cover, and 7 are ministerial appointments. We get a core grant and aid from Scottish Government each year, and then we leverage in other funding on top of that. So roughly speaking, our budget this year is about £16 million. We've got about, and it depends on the time of year, 105 to 120 staff employed by the Park Authority at any one time. We leverage in a significant amount of money from other sources, so things like National Lottery Heritage Fund, other funding opportunities that are out there to try and supplement the funding that we get from Scottish Government. The Park Authority itself is, I suppose it's a bit different to some of those in that we don't own any land at all within the Cairngorms National Park. So everything we do is working with people, other businesses on the land, tourism businesses, communities, etc., to do things within the national park. And all of that work is sort of corralled through the management plan that we have for the area, which is the National Park Partnership Plan, which is produced every 5 years. And it's a statutory management plan for the area, which all public bodies have got to have responsibility for delivering, which is quite a key thing there, in that it's not just the Park Authority. So once it's in the plan, it's for all public bodies have a duty to help to implement that plan, which is great. We have 4 aims within national parks. So the aims that you'll probably know, but there's natural and cultural heritage aim, there's a natural resources aim, there's an enjoyment of the area, and there's the socio-economic well-being of the parks communities is the 4th aim. So those 4 aims have to be achieved collectively by the Park Authority and through the National Park Partnership Plan. So the idea is to achieve all of those collectively. None of the aims are above the others. If there is a conflict between the aims, and only if there's a conflict, greater weight is given to the first aim. So that's the sort of the process, if you like, around that. There's been a lot happened in the Cairngorms over the last 20 years, and 10 minutes and 20 years and 10 minutes is quite a tricky ask. But what I'll try and do is try and set out where we are and where we have been in terms of some of the tourism side of things. So one of the first things to say is that we are we have got the European Charter for Sustainable Tourism in Protected Areas. And that's something we started off in 2005 and is verified independently every 5 years. So that's basically something that allows us to say that actually what we're doing, what the plans and what the actions we're doing are actually going to lead to sustainable tourism within the Cairngorms National Park. And we're one of the, I think of only 2 areas in the UK that do that. There are hundreds across Europe, but in terms of the UK, and it really does give us a good baseline for what we're doing, how we're doing it, and what we need to do next to try and help to do that. In 2023, the tourism economy in the Cairngorms is worth roughly 419 million. And in terms of total visitors to the Cairngorms Park in 2023, it was about 2.1 million people visiting the Cairngorms. If you go back in time to when we first set up, it was about 1.4 million people visit the Cairngorms. So you can see that sort of has been an increase over time, but roughly speaking, that's relatively in line with changes in tourism visitors across Scotland during that time as well. It's quite an interesting one in terms of what's the park policy on tourism. There's obviously quite a lot around that, but I suppose one bit that I would just highlight is that we have work which is to work to stabilise visitor numbers in the peak season, focusing growth in quieter months and on those areas that have the infrastructure and the capacity to accommodate additional visitors. We're not looking to just increase visitor numbers to the Cairngorms National Park. It's never been one of the key issues. The key issue for us is trying to make sure that the season is extended around this and trying to make sure that we have the right infrastructure in the right places to deal with people coming to the park. We also do a lot of work with the Cairngorms Business Partnership, and Craig will say a lot more about that, so I'll stay off of that if you like just now. But we have been doing a lot of work on a winter campaign over the past few years to try and extend that season and to see what we can do. And we've been having some interesting effects on that. So comparing between 2019 and 2023, we've seen a 28% increase in visitors in the January to March period and 10% between October and December, and a flat line or slight decrease between April and September. So actually that thing of trying to elongate the season and try and concentrate people into the shoulder months is certainly starting to have an impact around that, which is something we're really keen to do. The Cairngorms Business Partnership also run a business barometer side of things, which again, I'm sure Craig will say more about, but there's some really good stats in that about how much having a national park attracts first-time visitors and repeat visitors for businesses. So in terms of that, I'd say the last time round, it was 51% of businesses stated that the CMP had a high level of attracting first-time visitors and 37% on repeat visitors. And we also do a 5-yearly visitor survey to the Cairngorms National Park, which we've done right the way through. So there's some really good stats going all the way back. But we're doing one currently in terms of a visitor survey for the Cairngorms. And provisionally, in terms of what we've got data so far, is that 71% of visitors said the fact that the area is a national park was important in their decision to visit. And that rose to 82% for visitors from Europe. So it's quite the brand, if you like, of national park is a very strong brand. And it's something that then can be used by businesses and others to attract people in. And as I said, Craig will say more about that. Just moving on briefly to the visitor management side of things, which I suppose is the flip side of that, is that we've got people coming to the national park. How do we manage those? So in ranger services in the national park, we've got about 50 rangers within the Cairngorms National Park. The Park Authority, and I should say on top of that, we also have about 80 volunteer rangers as well, which the Park Authority runs that programme as well. 22 of those rangers are directly employed by the Park Authority, and then a number of ranger services that are on estates are grant aided to an extent by the Park Authority. So things like Rothiemurchus, Atholl, Balmoral, etc., all get grant aid from the Cairngorms National Park Authority to have their ranger services, and they put in funding as well. And then there are some other ranger services on top of that. So about 50 in total. And so, for instance, this year, the Park Authority Rangers undertook 1,398 patrols within the Cairngorms National Park, and the Ranger Services in total engaged with almost 30,000 people within the Cairngorms. We've also got extra funding during the summer for police patrols in some key hotspots, mainly around the Loch Lomond area, to try and make sure that we deal with any issues that do arise. And that's all undertaken under the auspices of the bi-weekly visitor management group for the Cairngorms. So that's Park Authority, Police, Fire Services, Estates, Ranger Services, Nature Scot, everyone all sit on that group, meets every 2 weeks, and we decide what we're doing in the coming 2 weeks and try and make sure we're coordinated entirely in terms of visitor management issues across the park. And then things like where we've had things that we think are coming up the agenda, both from a climate and many other things. So things like fire management, for instance, we're at the moment going through the process of putting in place a fire bylaw, which will restrict people having open fires and barbecues between the 1st of April and the 3rd of September each year within the Cairngorms National Park. So that's in its final stages. It'll be going to the board on the 14th of February and then goes to Scottish Government after that for hopefully approval. But it's the sort of thing that national parks can do in terms of some of those local things. And then the final bit, just to sort of, is infrastructure investment, and that's really key. So there's obviously things that will be available in places like Galloway and the area, things like the RTIF that VisitScotland were running. The Park Authority itself has its own visitor infrastructure improvement programme. This current year, there's about 400k to 500k of funding being spent through that on projects all across the national park. As I said, that's projects to people out there because the Park Authority doesn't own any facilities itself, so it tends to be things like car park extensions, toilets, path improvements, things like that we do underneath that, and signage such as. And then we also this year ran the Climate Adaptation Fund within the Cairngorms National Park. Again, it was 370k funding, and that went to an array of different people. That was across lots of different things, but some of that was relevant to visitor management, such like things like fire fogging units for some of the estates, etc. So things that we can help to do. I would say the key thing for me is that the brand is a very powerful one that can be used by businesses, one that can be used to promote things, one that can be used to promote sustainability. We've been lucky with the partners that we have in terms of how we do all that. And tourism is incredibly important for the Cairngorms economy, but it's not the only aspect of the Cairngorms economy. I suppose I focused on that today because that's what we're obviously here to talk about, but that works within a whole range of other things the Park Authority does, from planning to many other aspects. And I suppose that's one of the key things for us is we're looking to make sure the right development is happening as well within the Cairngorms, and that's led to things like the new distillery that's opened up outside Granton-on-Spey, and many other different developments across the Cairngorms, where we're trying to use our planning powers to make sure that the right development's happening in the right place. So that's a very quick run through in terms of coming from the Park Authority side of things, and I'll hand back to David and I think across to Craig, and then I would take some questions.
Grant, that was absolutely perfect. Thank you very much indeed. Impeccable timing. Let me pass without delay to Craig, Chief Exec of the Cairngorms Business Partnership, which runs the consumer-facing brand Visit Cairngorms. Craig, over to you.
Right. Thank you, David, and thank everybody for having me here today. It's great to see so many people involved in this stage of the process. I think it's really important that people come along and they hear the facts before they make up their mind. That's always been my views on things like this. So yeah, so as mentioned, my name is Craig. I'm the Chief Exec of the Cairngorms Business Partnership, and complete opposite end of the scale to Grant. I've only been in post now for almost 1 year to the day. So I can stop saying I'm the new guy in town now, but I still, compared to some people, I still am quite new. So the Cairngorms Business Partnership, just to give you a quick recap of what we are, the Cairngorms Business Partnership is a membership organisation that acts as the Chamber of Commerce and the destination management organisation for the Cairngorms National Park area. So we're not just facing tourism businesses, we also work with a lot of other industries within the park, which is fantastic. That said, 80% of my membership is made up of tourism-facing businesses, so quite a popular industry for us here in the Cairngorms. At present, we have around about 400 members that operate all around the park, varying from small guest houses to large hotel chains and everything in between, big large-scale activity providers, one-man band operations, you name it, we have got in the Cairngorms. So quite a diverse network that we work with, which is great. I think I should also say as well that it was, it's not on my notes, but I do remember working for a rival DMO before I started with the CBP. And it was a next door neighbour basically, and we used to look quite enviously on to what was happening in the Cairngorms quite a lot, because we would steal a lot of their practices, not going to lie, and steal because they were doing things very well. I've subsequently been told by my team they used to do the same thing to me at my rival DMO, so that was quite interesting. But grass is always greener, I suppose. As a membership organisation, we are obviously clearly driven by delivering what our members expect from us, and being quite a diverse group of businesses. Those asks are very, very varied. A lot of people come to us wanting networking events, social events, training, education, you name it, and that's what we have to deliver for them. But as I say, 80% of the members being tourism businesses or hospitality businesses, one of the big asks that we get a lot is for PR and marketing support. That's ultimately what they want from us, is to try and shout about the area, to try and get bookings, because success for me at CBP isn't about having 400 members. It's not about having clicks on websites. It's about my members having a future and having income. That's what success looks like. So we have to deliver that quite a lot. And the PR and marketing side of things, it's an incredibly difficult task, contrary to popular belief, because we run a very, very tight line that we don't want to be, as Grant says, promoting the area at the high peak season, which is very easy to do. You know, we could shout about how great the area is when it's already too busy. And at the same time, we run the risk of the thing that attracts people to the area, or a lot of people to the area, should I say, is the landscape, the beauty, the natural scenery. we don't want to ruin that by having too many people potentially come and act irresponsibly. So it doesn't benefit any of us if these things happen. So we really have to be quite balanced with how we can help the businesses with their marketing and their support. And a lot of my time is spent talking to businesses about how we can tweak messaging and how we can try and alter the messaging to try and attract the right people, and also have that responsible enjoyment messaging weaved into that messaging. Another thing that I always raise whenever I talk at this kind of stage is that I don't just see my members as businesses and community. They are the community for me. The people that change the beds in the hotels, the people that run the B&Bs, they are also people that shop in local shops. Kids go to local schools. So they are also impacted when the negative impacts do happen. So I think we're all trying to sing from the same hymn sheets, so to speak, at the same time. So it's just important always when people are complaining about the negative sides of tourism that these people do feel it as well. So Grant mentioned the Winter Comes to Life campaign, which I'll come to in a minute, but ways in which we at the CVP have been working with the Cairngorms National Park Authority over the past few years has been that we've developed a number of projects to try and drive traffic to areas of the park that can facilitate large volumes of visitors at those quieter times of year. And the ways in which we've done that are projects such as the Snow Roads, which is a road trip through the Cairngorms National Park. It showcases different areas that are perhaps not as well known on the back of visitors looking for that road trip kind of holiday these days. That's a really good successful project that's been running over the years. We developed Badenoch the Storylands, which is a great way to people to immerse themselves in the culture of the national park in an area that is absolutely set up to deal with high volumes of visitors and traffic. And anybody that's not been to a Badenoch the Storylands kind of event, I would really recommend it when you're coming up the A9, stop in and see what's happening, because the events are fantastic. The community have really got on board with that. We've also got the Speyside Way, which again, slightly differently, it's a long distance walking project. So it's getting people out of their cars, out of transport, again, seeing parts of the park that they wouldn't see before, and encountering lots of local people who are more than happy to share their experiences and their own walks. So a different type of customer we're attracting with that. And the one that's it's a very interesting project for me to be working with is the Dark Skies project. So the Dark Skies project, for those that don't know, is an area of the park that is got a lot of fantastic views to see the Milky Way, to see the Northern Lights, to see the fantastic lights in the sky at night. And it's an area of the park, again, that is screaming out for visitors. And the thing I like about it is that it's so minimal impact, because it's a nighttime event. People can go out and do other activities during the day, and they can then spend the time at night going out and see the sky. And activity providers and accommodation providers in the area have been really good at drawing up packages and being quite innovative with their offering and diversifying their offering to people. So it's a really nice project. I just say it's interesting to me because I live in the north of Scotland, where there's a lot of dark sky around about me. So I think it's just something I take for granted all the time. So it's nice to promote that one. And the winter campaign that Grant has mentioned, the Winter Comes to Life. This is something this year that I've been incredibly happy with the success of. Our Winter Comes to Life campaign was seen by the top line figures was around 5 million people so far have seen our PR campaign, which is fantastic. And just yesterday, there was a press release that went out from a number of businesses who have reported a bumper year to their winter campaign this year. So we're hoping that success continues over the next couple of months before the campaign comes to a finish. And a meeting I just walked out of before coming to this one with some in Grant's team. We were just talking about a good success story with this winter campaign has been that many small businesses are actually looking to invest in their own campaign this year on the back of this winter campaign. And that's a massive success for me, because businesses, as we know, are facing so much pressure and costs are going up. The fact that they're willing to invest in this, it shows me that it's really working. And again, that's the success for me. It doesn't matter how many people click on that advert. If the businesses aren't seeing the benefit of it, it's been a failure. So really delighted with how that's worked this past year. So watch this space for the summer campaign, where you'll see a lot more of the responsible enjoyment messaging that, again, we've worked with the Park Authority and with a lot of local stakeholders to design. So you'll see some fun videos with comedian Ed Byrne kind of coming along and telling you how to go to the toilet in nature, how to stick to the paths, how to behave with your dog. It's done in a very humorous way, but it's one that we know hits well with our audience. So That's been developed, as I say, over the last year or so. You'll see more of that coming from us, hopefully, if the businesses can fund it the right way. And that's the public facing side of things of what we do with the Park Authority. In a nutshell, there is more, but that's the kind of high level stuff. Grant has already mentioned the barometer survey and the managing for visitors group. So just to quickly to point out on the barometer survey, which is completely free for anyone to see on the Cairngorms Chamber website, or I can send it out to the group if it's of any use. The barometer survey this year, it just got published in December for the last quarter. And one of the big kind of things I was really happy with, the headline stats in there, was we asked the businesses in the park which organisations they found most useful for their business and to develop their business plans. I'm delighted to say that CBP and CMPA featured in the top 3, which when you see the list of businesses that are on there, and even ones that are not on the final draft of the survey, the responses were very, 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 very long and extensive lists. So really happy with that. So we do this every year with the Park Authority, and it's a good way for businesses to gauge the confidence in the park and set that alongside the visitor survey, which the Park Authority do. And the Managing for Visitors group, just to touch very briefly on that, because I'm aware of time. The Managing for Visitors group, to be completely open with it, this is something that happens across all of Scotland, is managing for visitor groups. And I've been lucky enough to sit on various different ones across Scotland. And some of them, you do get the impression that they're doing this as a tick box exercise in their area. I have to say that with the Cairngorms one, the group of people that are around that table, they don't see it as a tick box exercise. We at the CBP have listened to the stakeholders at that meeting. We have altered our messaging. We've changed our campaigns based on what that feedback has been. So it's been a real journey with all the stakeholders that we're doing work with them and not to them. And a lot of that comes down to who's organising those managing for visitors groups, which Grant's team do very, very well. So I think people will maybe have experience of those managing for visitors groups, but I think it's our area has done a really good job of it in the Cairngorms. So that's a very, very brief nutshell. I'm happy to take any questions at all on anything further. But as I say, just bear in mind, anything that happened 13 months ago, Grant will be the best place to answer.
Fantastic. Well, listen, Craig, thanks ever so much for your sharing and your candor and your honesty about stealing from other DMOs. Please make sure, Sarah and Gowan, that we've nailed everything down, that Craig can't steal any South of Scotland state secrets in this call. But no, genuinely, thanks ever so much. That was really useful. What I'm going to do now, I've just put in the chat box a couple of links. Firstly, the link to, if you haven't already completed the Nature Scot consultation, whatever your view is, pro or negative, make sure you complete it. The link's in the chat box. But also I put a link to the results of that survey that we did in the autumn before the formal consultation started. And what I've done is pulled out what I see as the 7 top concerns or worries that businesses had about a possible Galloway National Park. And what I want to do is, I suppose, a quick fire over the next 10 minutes, rattle through these 7, and for Grant and Craig to be able to give a quick response to each of these 7 issues or concerns. And I suppose that the biggest concern was that a national park might cause over-tourism, with the resultant issues around litter and problem motorhomes, dog mess and dirty camping and wildfires and just a general loss of tranquility. So I don't know, Grant, if you want to go first, then Craig, a sort of quick fire response. Is that an issue that you've had at Cairngorms as a result of creating a national park?
Yeah, so very quickly, I mean, it's a big national park, so we're 4,500 square kilometres. There are no doubt there are certain hotspots within the Cairngorms. So I mentioned Loch Lomond previously. If you go to Dinnet or Linnet D, where people are, you get a lot of people in those locations. But I suppose that's where we focus our patrols and our rangers and our infrastructure to try and deal with those things. So things like in this past year, I was just looking at the stats just now, our rangers, so this is the Park Authority rangers, put out 225 fires and dealt with 558 old fire sites. So I suppose what we've got is we've got people on the site to deal with these issues. But in terms of tranquility, there are vast areas where you can go and have a walk by yourself and you'll never meet anyone in the whole day. So I suppose it depends what you're looking for. But I don't think there's an issue of over tourism within the Cairngorms. I think what we've got to try and make sure is that people who come know how to behave responsibly and have access to the right paths, the right infrastructure, the right toilets, the right places to go. And if we can make sure that's all right, most people want to do the right thing. I mean, that's the key thing for me. Most people, most of the time, want to do the right thing. You will always have some people, but then that's when we deal with them either through the ranger side of things or we get involved with the police, etc. So I think we've got quite a good balance around that sort of the idea of over-tourism. But there's always more we can do. And I suppose the fire bylaw would be a good example of where we're actually trying to take something a bit further forward in terms of trying to deal with a specific issue.
That's really useful. Thanks, Craig. Anything you'd want to add on that? Over tourism, problem camping, all of that stuff.
Absolutely. I think over tourism for me is one of these buzzwords that sets me off. So apologies if I go on, just feel free to cut me off. I think my question back whenever I get asked about over tourism is who decides too much is too much, because the messaging from us at the CBP is not created by me sitting at a desk far away from these areas. It's put out from the businesses that are saying, I have got empty rooms, I have got activities that are not getting booked up. Can you help me get this? So the businesses are saying they've not got enough. They've got facilities to take more. So it's over tourism. Is it because somebody who doesn't like tourists coming to their area, why should they get a bigger vote than the people that are employing people in the community? So I think that over tourism is a dangerous word to be used a lot, but absolutely tourism does bring with it an element of disruption. And we've all seen that, we've all been there. I think the benefit of having a park authority working with you is that you've got resource that you can try and put to areas that you know need to work. As I say, in my previous role, I didn't have a park authority there to help deal with these situations, and that exacerbated the problem even further. So absolutely, the park authority, you could say, encourages tourism, also mechanisms there to deal with people that are acting irresponsibly. So I think I'll leave it there before I rant anymore.
No, that's great. Thanks very much, Greg. And just to repeat the numbers that Grant said earlier on. So it's total visitor numbers have increased from 1.4 million 20 years ago to 2.1 million now. So it's compound growth rate of a few percent, or also broadly in line with tourism growth rates across Scotland. The next concern that the businesses were identifying was around infrastructure capacity, about the roads and the railways. Are they going to be able to cope with the national park? I don't know whether either Grant or Craig, you want to jump in on infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, happy to say a little bit on that.
Sorry, I mean, Grant, are being too polite.
I don't think. I mean, we've not had anyone. It's not an issue that gets raised with us, particularly in terms of rail or road infrastructure. I mean, the A9 is obviously in the middle of a dualling process. The one bit of A9 that has been, there's been two bits of the A9 dual so far. One of those was within the Cairngorms National Park. There's been a new hospital built in Aviemore. So I mean, in terms of, we're always trying to make sure we've got the right infrastructure. Obviously, most of that sits outside the remit of the park authority. I mean, it's not. We tend to be consultees in these things, or in certain cases, the planning authority around them. But I was looking at the stats on the A9. Actually, I've got them here, which is traffic flows on the A9 from 2011 to 2022. And the traffic movements in Aviemore were 7,288 on the A9 in both directions in 2011, and it's 8,875 in 2022. So, I don't think there's a big issue there around that. In terms of, I understand there's an issue around some of the road infrastructure in the Galloway area, but I'm not sure that there's any read across to suggest that a national park will cause significant issues associated with that.
Fantastic, thanks, Grant. Craig, anything you'd add on infrastructure at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll probably kick myself for bringing it up, but there's got to be advantages of tourism coming to an area. And if you look at the proposed visitor levy bill that some local government authorities are looking at bringing in, that is something that can go towards supporting infrastructure for tourists. I've also got an opinion that infrastructure is not just aimed at tourists. I've never in my life been anywhere in Scotland that says you can't use this bin or this toilet because you're not a visitor or because you're a local. Infrastructure for me is just infrastructure, and it's good enough for the local person, it's good enough for the tourist. It should be there for everyone to use, but I think we need to look at the positive, and we need to try and see how can we try and maximise the benefits of this area. We've discussed today, but definitely need to look at positives.
Fantastic. And speaking of which, Craig shared just before we started that he's having broadband improved installed today as we're speaking. So an infrastructure investment going in. And the next concern that respondents were saying was around farming. around the impact that having a national park would have on farming. And again, I want to emphasize there is no one size fits all with a national park. If Galloway gets one, it will be appropriate for Galloway and based on what the people of Galloway want. And it will not necessarily be the same as the Cairngorms or Loch Lomond. But with that caveat, it'd be great to just hear a bit more about, each of you touched on it, but the relationship of the national park and the impact of the national park on other industries, most especially farming.
Yeah, I can say a little bit around this. I mean, it's quite a strange one for me. And the National Park Authority does not regulate farming. It's the same inside the national park as outside the national park in terms of regulation of farming. And in terms of the different grant and subsidy regimes within the national park, they're the same inside and outside the national park for farming as well. They're all run nationally, as is the regulatory side of things. There is a slight difference in terms of one aspect of planning, in which is the size of sheds with which you can have permitted development inside and outside the national park. That's the only significant difference between the two regimes. In terms of how we work with farmers, we work with lots and lots of farmers all across the national park, but it's all done on a voluntary basis. Because we don't own any land, so any farmer that works with us is working with us because they want to work with us, and we work with lots on. We've got geese schemes, we've got lots of work we do on waders, we've got 6 farms within the future farming project within the national park. There's lots and lots of things going about, but the key thing for me is it's all voluntary to try and say, look, this is the sort of stuff that we're wanting to do, what are the things that farmers are trying to do, and we try and find something that works together. So overall, I think the national park and other people use obviously things like the brand in terms of the business side of things as well. So there's lots of opportunities. We work with, as I said, the tourism businesses. We work with the estates. We have regular land management forums within the national park. We've got the Cairngorms Agriculture Advisory Group within the Cairngorms. We do lots of work through our economic steering group in terms of wider bits around that. Housing being a key issue, I suppose, in terms of what we're looking to do within the Cairngorms as well. So I think there's lots of opportunities for our park authority, and what we try and do with the Cairngorms is to work with as many people as possible to try and deliver on those 4 aims. That's the key thing for me. And frankly, we'll work with anyone who wants to sort of help, and we'll try and do what's the right thing for the area, both from and locals and residents side of things is very important to that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Grant. Craig, 20% of your members, from what you said, are not tourism businesses. Could you say a bit about that and the relationship, with farming and forestry?
Absolutely. Yeah, we don't have many farmers as members of ours, but what we do is we encourage our hospitality and tourism sectors to shop local, to buy local, and use the produce, because that's ultimately what the visitor wants. So we do encourage them to try and speak with farmers about how they can diversify their market, how they can diversify their offering. We have had some success stories in my old job of farms who have turned to agritourism, who have tried to turn that kind of different style of their business, where they've had money being pulled from elsewhere. They've had to try and find other income sources. So we're trying just now to try and put that out there with the farms. And as Grant mentioned as well about the use of branding, I think that's really important. That we have got the made in Cairngorms or Make It Yours brand. I think that's the brand that the farm can get behind, because having that stamp on it, it can be as popular as Scotch beef or Castle of May or May Selections. These kind of brands that are well known and sold throughout the world on that brand. We should be proud of that in the Cairngorms, and I think that was a good opportunity, and having the park authority there to kind of champion that isn't a bad thing. So say very soft touch with the farmers at this side, but we have got plans moving ahead to do more with farms at the CVP. Another small thing just to beat the drum as well for tourism is that we do talk with farmers as well, and we do let them know about messaging, so that if people are walking across land or lambing season or anything that can impact negatively on their businesses, we are listening to them as well and changing messaging again through the Managing for Visitors group. But
fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Great. Just going back to the results of the survey of businesses in the sort of proposed Galloway National Park area. One of the things, interestingly, probably the only thing that united those who were in favour of the idea of a Galloway National Park and those who are against was this fear that it might be really bureaucratic and bloated and administrative and inefficient and slow. I wonder whether it'd be great to get both of your perspective on that as a challenge, as far as, if people in Galloway are worried, are we just going to be creating, huge layers of administration and bureaucracy? I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on the efficiency of operation and the sort of return on investment on the national park in the Cairngorms.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first on that. I mean, look, we are, at the end of the day, a public body. We are trying to do the right thing for the area, and that means taking into account lots of views. And some of that can take a bit of time because there will be differing views on what we need to do. What I would say is that we're quite fleet of foot in making things happen. So if you look at something like, well, I'll go back to that, the fire bylaw side of things. If we waited for a national solution to that, I think we'd probably be waiting quite a long time. So the park board made a decision to move forward, had a consultation, over 1,600 people replied to it. We looked at all of that, we've taken the wording, sorted that out, and it's now going to our board in February. It's relatively quick turnaround in terms of trying to move forward on something that will have a fairly big impact on the Cairngorms area. And I think one of the key things around all of this is we've got a lot of good staff, we've got a lot of rangers out in the ground, we've got ecologists, we've got people who work with community development, we work with a lot of different partners. But the whole point of it is to try and make sure that the area is a good place, both for residents and for visitors and for nature. And that takes sometimes quite a lot of shuggling to try and see what the right direction is. So I don't think it's a particularly bureaucratic, it's not a bureaucratic organisation, but not all bureaucracy is bad. I realise a public servant might say that, but you sometimes need that because you're trying to take account of differing views, and people will have very differing views about it, and they might agree with you on something, they might disagree with you on another thing. But I think the board is representative of the area and makes good, timely decisions to try and do the right things for the Cairngorms. We can probably always be better, but it's certainly not something that's thrown around in terms of that our processes are particularly difficult. So, for instance, Climate Adaptation Fund last year, we got the funding for that at the end of March. We got it out in April. People applied in June. They got the money in July, and they had to complete the project by March. That's pretty fast turnaround on things that probably take a bit longer in other organisations. So I think there's a pretty good story to tell there in the Cairngorms.
Fantastic, thanks, Grant. Craig, anything you'd want to add on that sort of efficiency and bureaucracies?
Absolutely. I think that I can't hide it from you because I've recommended you check out a barometer survey. The majority of our members have said that they do find it is very bureaucratic. So that's their feelings on the matter. What we've done from that, on that feedback, is that we've set up a B2B sectoral groups. We hold sector group meetings with all of our members. We've set up a new one in the last 6 months where we're sitting them down around the table asking what do they exactly mean by that? Is it timing? Is it the Park Authority? Is this Highland Council or other councils? Trying to drill down exactly what they mean by where's this issue so that we can try and find solutions. Some of the claims have been levelled at the Park Authority, and subsequently I've went and had a chat with Grant. I've had a chat with the Economic Steering Group, and we are looking at steps of how we can reduce it down. So I think that although right now it's a bit of a headache for people, the story is that we're looking at it and how can we try and fix this problem? And there's no burying their heads in the sands about it. Businesses are feeling that way. Small businesses don't have a lot of time to go through that level of bureaucracy, don't have the level of staff at the Park Authority, but the team at the Park Authority are willing to look at things and willing to change things to suit the businesses based on the feedback. So it is a complete 360 loop with ourselves, with the Park Authority and with the businesses, and they are being listened to, which is really good. And hopefully the meeting I just had before this one, as I say, hopefully we've made some good inroads there moving ahead. And next year's survey will show a different result on the bureaucracy level. Really good.
Fantastic. No, really appreciate that openness, Craig. And, I agree. The fact that the conversation is being had, the businesses are being listened to and changes are being made is really, really encouraging. Just final quick fire challenge or concern from this side, just on affordable housing. I don't know, Grant, have you got any numbers on affordable housing? Having had a national park for the last 20 years, what impact has it had as far as affordable housing? It's been a big concern in Galloway.
Yeah, I actually think this is one where it is quite a good story actually in terms of. So, is there a problem of a lack of affordable housing in the Cairngorms? Yes, there is. Just as there is across the whole of Scotland. I mean, it's one of the key issues we have everywhere. I think we've been able to tackle it quite interestingly within the Cairngorms. So, For instance, we've got 45% affordable housing rate requirements in 4 key places in the Cairngorms. So in Aviemore, in Blair Athol, Braemar and Ballater, it's 45% affordable housing. In the rest of Scotland, it's 25%. So that's quite a difference. We also have the short-term let control area in Badenich and Strathspey, which is to try and ensure that we've got housing staying as housing and not moving into short-term let side of things. And that's been put in by Highland Council with the backing of the Park Authority, and that's only been in for a while, but we've already got some good movement around that, I think, as well. And we've got a target that's by 2030, 75% of housing that's built in the Cairngorms is affordable housing as well. So there's some really good stuff there in terms of what we've got in place. In terms of what's happened over the past few years, so between 2017 and 2022, 175 affordable units were completed, and over 400 houses were completed in total. There's been well over 2,000 houses built in the Cairngorms since it became a national park. So, there's some positive things around that. There is still a lot more work to be done. And I suppose the underlying part to this is that house prices have risen a lot everywhere. So if you look at the stats for between 1993 and 2022, so this is before the national park and right up till now, for the Highland region, house prices increased by 334%, Perth and Kinross by 320%, Scotland as a whole 291%, and the Cairngorms National Park was 333%. So we are similar to the areas which are around us. That is the issue, is that wages have not gone up anywhere near the same amount, and that's the same across the whole of Scotland, and housing has become more unaffordable. So there's a key issue around that. But what I would say is that things like our local development plan is moving ahead very well in terms of delivery. In terms of our average determination for planning applications in our last report we did was 7.6 weeks. And in that year, which is the previous year to this, 100% of applications were approved. So I would say that in terms of some of those things, I think we are moving in the right direction, but there's a lot more to be done on affordable housing. And that's something that the Park Authority is really keen to do as the planning authority, to work with the housing authorities and builders and other people to try and resolve that, and to make sure we're building the right houses, which is a key thing. It's not just about building houses, it's building the right houses for people who want to live and work there. And that's got to be affordable to people. And that's a big challenge for all of us.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Grant. I want to pivot to look at some of the positives and opportunities that are there. Reminder, do put your question into the chat box. We just had one so far. Michael, I promise we will get to your question. Before I do, I wonder, Craig, if I could turn to you. I mean, you've obviously, you know these businesses, you're listening to them, you're working with them, you've got experience in at least a couple of DMOs. Could you tell us more about, from a really local business perspective, what's the value of the brand National Park from your perspective, Craig?
Absolutely. So the brand is absolutely fantastic thing to have on our doorstep. Previously, I've gone to businesses and explained, again, not to bring up previous role, developing a brand and really trying to monetize that and the costs involved in that. Talking hundreds of thousands of pounds to get a brand to the level that we're at with the Cairngorms just now. And the fact that the businesses can access this for absolutely nothing is fantastic. And businesses are grabbing that opportunity. And I don't have stats right now to back it up, sorry, because it's work that we're doing right this second in the office, is we are pulling together the businesses that have used the branding, exactly what that has meant on their bottom line, the amount of time spent to implement it. What we're doing is we're arranging a host of workshops in the next month as well, because with the project, this is what's quite interesting with the way we're working in the Cairngorms just now, is it's not just access to the Park Authority branding, it's the other projects that we've developed together, which is the Snow Roads, the Badenoch, the Storelines, the Dark Skies. All of these brands are free for the businesses to use. And more businesses are seeing, actually, this is a really, really good thing, because we're giving them the good examples of other brands around about Scotland, around about Britain, that are really capitalised on the need for a brand. And for a small business, as one business member put it to me, it's absolutely priceless having this access. They couldn't put a figure on how much it has helped their business. So I think that the branding is something that we've got a bit of work to do with, because it's something that, with my experience, why I've been brought into the CBP, that we're going to be ramping up more of. But the businesses, they are keen to do more work with us on the branding. And to be honest with you, it's actually the reverse I've got now. It's not trying to get businesses to use it. it's just trying to harness it to make sure people are using it in the right way before they do it in a bad way, because I've experienced that myself. So we've got a very, very good situation to be in just now, if I'm honest with you, in the Cairngorms.
Fantastic, thank you, Craig. And Grant, in your introductory remarks, you talked about how important it was from the visitor survey, particularly the European visitors, for that brand national park. I think, and anything you'd want to add to that, Grant, from your perspective, as far as the power of the national park brand.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is, I suppose, just to say that as a national park, you're part of a family of national parks. So not only do we operate with the other national parks in the UK, but we also are part of Europark, which covers all the national parks across the whole of Europe. And I suppose that thing is that, lots of people, national park is used to be the place that people want to visit because it's the nicest bits of a country, whatever it might be, and people have an image of it in their head already in terms of what a national park is. And I suppose what we then get to do is to just use that to then start to make it Cairngorms specific. Just as if there is a national park in Galloway, you start to make that Galloway specific. I mean, all these things, the one thing I'd say around this is that Loch Lomond and the Cairngorms have been around for 20 years. We do things quite differently in both the national parks. It's not that they're clones of each other. In fact, they're quite different in lots of different ways. They own land and property within Loch Lomond. They've got things like the camping bylaws. We don't have camping bylaws. They run their operations in different ways and have a different focus on things. So I think that's one of the key things for me, is that the legislation is enabling legislation to set up the thing that works locally within an area. And there's some key things that all national parks do, but there's also the ability for that to be tuned, and things like the brand of Galloway, whatever that might look like if it happens, would be up to the people in the area to come up with that. It's not going to be imposed by anyone else.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Grant. I'm really interested in the relationship and the way the different organisations work together across the sort of private and public sector. And I thought it was interesting, Craig, what you said about to the bureaucracy question of, you've listened to businesses and now these are the conversations that you're having. It would be brilliant, maybe Craig first and then Grant, if you're able to reflect on the way that you work together, the sort of private and the public sector. And this feels a bit like that TV show First Dates, where I ask each of you in turn about how you find the relationship. So apologies in advance for that. But Craig, give me the candid answer. What's the relationships that you have as a result of having a national park?
For me, and again, I put out there that it's been a year, so we're maybe still in the honeymoon period. I don't know, but I can only speak from my experience and nobody else's. And it has been that I think it was my second day in the job that I was invited to the park offices. The meeting was set up, and I'll be honest, I'd heard stories. I've heard stories about the Park Authority Act. I've heard different things about public sector, and I'm into it quite open eyes. And I've never had such a warm welcome from such a large group of people. I think, to be fair, Grant may remember that I was a bit of a rabbit in the headlights because I've met with so many people in this organisation that day. But the fact that the people behind the brand, they are people, and they do, the passion comes out, and everybody that I've met that works for the Park Authority, the passion does come out, and they share the frustrations that the private businesses feel. Some of the people I speak to within Grant's offices are upset with the amount of paperwork and bureaucracy behind the scenes. They get it, they understand, but they're there to do a job. And it's good that they do help and support the CVP an awful lot in various different ways, but there's never really a feeling of, they're the boss, they're pulling the strings. Grant and his team will always listen. They'll always open to suggestions from us. They know with the conversation, again, I keep on referring to just before this call with some of Grant's team, is the conversation was around strengths and weaknesses. And they're very, very clear with me about what they see their weaknesses being and what our strengths are and how we can try and dovetail them together. So that's just my experience. I think that they're very open. And I should also say that I was brought up in Loch Lomond National Park as it was being introduced in Loch Lomond. I've still got family there. So I can see things from a local people person point of view that's not involved in tourism. I've seen it from all the different angles. And I do say that the relationship, I couldn't ask for a better relationship. And I do pity the Park Authority, and sometimes because I have been the bad guy in the room in the previous roles, and people like to have a bogeyman, and the Park Authority sometimes are that man. Don't get me wrong, I'm not just here to sing the praises. Sometimes I do get frustrated, but you have to take a breath and look at it from all angles in my role. And yeah, 9 times out of 10, the Park Authority are painted as the bad guy when they're not necessarily the bad guy.
Good stuff. Thanks, Craig. I'm going to turn to Grant for a quick fire response to that question. A reminder, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat box. Grant, come back to that question about relationships. Would you have a second date with Craig?
I would have thought. Yeah, I mean, I think that the key thing with me is being open and honest about what's working, what's not working, and trying to work out how that is. And there'll always be different viewpoints. I mean, so something that might be in the interests of Craig's members from a tourism point of view might be something that a local community somewhere doesn't want to happen. And the Park Authority's got to listen to all those different views. So it's that whole thing about you've got lots of different pressures on you from lots of different bits, but the whole point of, I suppose, the different things like having our economic group that Craig sits on or the tourism group is that we get to hear all of that, and then we take up as open and as transparently as possible. All our board meetings are public. All of them are live streamed. People can see how the decisions are made. Nothing's done behind the scenes. We're trying to make sure that we're there, and we try and make the right decisions for the area. They will not always be welcomed by everyone, but the whole point of, and I think the really great thing about the CBP is that it's got so many members that we're able to then find out quite easily what the sort of general feeling is around lots of businesses quite quickly through Craig and his team about a certain thing, and then we can adjust things for the next time. So I think it's that back and forth and making sure that there's a good relationship between us and Craig and his team, and other things like Visit Aberdeenshire exist and Visit Murray Speyside as well, that overlap slightly with the national park as well. So, you know, we've got good relationships with all of those. So I think that's the key thing.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Grant. I want to take some of the questions in the chat box. The first from Michael Barker. Hopefully you can see it yourself, but reading it out. I'm in Moffat. Our town's economy is heavily dependent on visitors, day trippers, short stay and impulse stops. We're outside the proposed area for the Galloway National Park, and there's no easy route from our location into the national park. I'm interested in the experiences of businesses and the visitor economy immediately outside the Cairngorms National Park area. Have they lost visitors at trade? Have they been sucked into the national park as a result of its promotion, leaving the economies around the park suffering the reduced visitor numbers? How have the areas outside the park managed the appeal of the park? And I'm going to take maybe Grant first and then Craig, if that's okay. What's your sense, Grant, of the impact of the national park in the areas immediately outside the park?
I don't have any stats for you, so I can't do visitor numbers, whether up or down outside the park directly. I don't think that's quite how it works. I mean, we've always had what we've called a sort of holy boundary or a porous boundary, in that we do work outside the national park boundaries. We work with schools outside the national park, etc. So there's, and I think there's quite a lot of the sort of places around the park who would view themselves as a sort of gateway into the national park or whatever it might be as well. So I think there's some benefit that can be had around that. And I don't think it's a case of us trying to, there's visitors just coming to the national park. I mean, people tend to stop on the way. There's other things, and we signpost things outside the national park as well. So I'm not sure that there's been anything sucked out of those areas into the national park, but I couldn't tell you statistically, has there been an increase or decrease in the Cabrach or whatever it might be from the fact there's a national park to the south? I don't know off the top of my head, David.
Thanks, Grant. Now, Craig, obviously your DMO has a geographic area, as all do, but you previously worked in a contiguous DMO. Craig, what's your sense of the impact of the national park on areas just outside?
I think, speaking from previous experience, we used to see it as a huge benefit because I live just north of Inverness. I'm an hour away from my office down in Aviemore, and I do see people going down to Cairngorms for the day trip out. So it does benefit because Inverness and the surrounding area, we do promote, come to Scotland and get this experience. And the good thing about, if you come to Inverness, you'll get a city experience, but half an hour, 40 minutes down the road, and you're in the middle of nowhere, it feels like. So I think it's a positive experience for those people on the periphery, because you can have your foot in both camps. You can say, if you want this type of experience, you can have it. If you want that type of experience, you can have it. And that's been the big benefit. And certainly to the south of the park as well, I think that has really worked well. Again, it's anecdotal, sorry, but a family member that runs a business in Perth, just outside the park boundary where he is, he benefits massively from people coming in and doing day trips in his coffee shop because he knows that people are going to the park for a day out and he can try and attract them. And I think that the thing about trying to get people to your area, if your offering is good enough, people will come, whether it's in a park or outside of the park. That's the thing. So you've got to make sure your offering is fantastic and people will come regardless. But I think overall positive effect on the surrounding area, if I'm honest with you, from my experience.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Craig. There's a question from Ross, which says, given the extreme strength of feeling of no Galloway National Park, is anyone else concerned about the consequences of aligning their business with either side? In some ways, that's a question more for participants in this meeting and for the SSDA to continue it. But I don't know whether, Grant, you did mention when we were speaking before about your experience having come down, and you spoke to some of the businesses when you were in person in D&G. Grant, do you want to just say something about that from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very small sample size, but I just walked into a few shops in different places and asked people about whether they were in favour of a national park. I didn't even mention where I was from, and well, to a person, everyone said that they were, but they didn't want to say anything, which was quite an interesting one for me. But as I said, it was a very small sample size. I suppose in terms of it's an interesting one. So when the Cairngorms was set up, our boundary is different to what it was in those days. So when the Cairngorms was set up in 2003, the Atholl area was excluded from the Cairngorms in the process. And actually, there was a big campaign from people to get into the national park. And in 2010, Atholl was then included in the national park, and the Cairngorm boundary moved from, in effect, Dromoctor down to Blair Atholl, so down the A9, and took in that big scalp of Perthshire. And there have been some campaigns over the years where people have written to see if the boundary could be expanded again. So, I mean, I get that there's a lot of strength of feeling. I suppose my feeling is that it's all about listening to the evidence and people making up their minds. But it shouldn't be something that should lead people, like, to my mind, it's an option for Galloway. Have a think about it, make a decision. I'm not sure getting angry in either direction. I'm not sure national parks are worth getting angry about in either way. Yes or no. I think it's probably a case of just thinking what's right for the place.
I think that's a very healthy sentiment. Thanks very much, Grant. I mean, one thing I would emphasize is completing a survey online is not a public act, and you're not going to be sort of named and shamed whether you're pro or against. You don't have to put a sign up, in the front of your business to say which way you're voting. So my encouragement, don't be intimidated. Whichever way you feel, don't be intimidated not to express that. And we've actually got Pete on the call from Nature Scott. So add anything in the chat box you wish to, Pete, there. But that would be my steer for businesses. Just feed in your view and don't let anyone say it's the wrong view, because it is your view, whichever way it is. Very final question before we wrap up. Christine Finley has said a residence clause for a house in the Lake District National Park is that local occupancy clause that prevents the property from being used as a second home or holiday let. The clause is intended to keep housing affordable for local people. Is there a need or desire for introducing something similar in Scotland's National Park? And I'm going to turn to Grant. Now, you mentioned the short-term lets control order. Could you say a bit more about that in response to Christine's question?
Yeah, so when the Cairngorms, this is before my time, but when the Cairngorms was set up, there was quite a long discussion about whether to introduce local occupancy clauses into the Cairngorms, and the final decision was not to. There's quite a lot of things around local occupancy conditions that are quite interesting, a bit technical, but and I suppose the short-term let control area tries to do something similar-ish, and it's trying through the planning system to have a control over whether a house can become a short-term let or not. So that it's only been in place, and I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, it's certainly about a year, I think, at most. So in terms of, we're quite early into it. So I can't say to you it's had this effect within the Cairngorms, but there was certainly a feeling that we were starting to get to the point where we had too many houses going into short-term let, and no matter how many affordable houses we were building, we were losing too many out the other end into short-term let, so we weren't actually increasing the overall amount. I suppose we'll know more in the next couple of years as to whether what we've put in with Highland Council, as Highland Council will lead on that, is having the effect that we want within the Cairngorms, and certainly one that we'll be keeping a close eye on, because we've got to get that balance right between having a good holiday accommodation sector, but not having villages or places where there's so much that things like local services, etc., close, because none of us want to see that. So it's trying to make that balance correct.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Grant. And I can see Pete jumping in the chat box say, yeah, absolutely. We would really encourage everyone to take part in the consultation. You can say in the online survey, if you don't want your named to be published, So you can do it anonymously. Absolutely. Friends, that's us out of time. I want to finish by saying a very big thank you, firstly, to Visit Scotland for helping facilitate the conversation. Most importantly, to Grant and Craig, who have come into, and bear in mind, this isn't part of their job. There's no degree of compulsion here. They've chosen to give up their time to share their views, and I want to say a really, really big thank you to both Grant and to Craig. They're busy men. Of course, we've only heard two perspectives from one national park, but I hope you found that useful as you yourself mull over these issues. I hope you found this informal conversation useful. And I think Grant's finishing point of, whether you're for or against, not getting too angry about it. I thought it was really interesting to know those visitor numbers at the start of the conversation, Grant. That this isn't sort of radical seismic change. There's not going to be a 500,000 people suddenly turning up in the Galloway area, but there is a really positive bit of brand development in the destination terms. And I don't know about you, but my perspective is, Grant and Craig seem to be working really positively together, and that seems to have been a positive thing for the Cairngorms. And I think that's reflected in both the resident survey and the business surveys. But I'm sure through Grant and Craig we can get the data there and we can share it more widely. Please, if you're in the area, whether you're in Galloway or in Ayrshire, and brilliant to have Ayrshire colleagues with us on the line, please feed in your view by the 14th of February. No one can forget Valentine's Day. I've got all the bruises for having done it in the past. Don't forget to submit your views, and thanks ever so much for your time. Have a great day. Bye for now.